David and Cindy, you guys have made such an incredible impact in family businesses and entrepreneurs here in Knoxville. And so 12 years, has it been 12 years? Happy anniversary. That is awesome. Thank you guys so much. Well, Cindy did ask for me to come and just share. I've been in family business for 35 years, a couple of family businesses for 35 years. And so she asked if I would come and just share some of what I've learned about being in a family business for so many years. And so just to give you a little bit of backstory, I thought it'd be quick to do a quick flyover of who Kevin Bailey is. I know some of you in here, and it's really good. It feels like a family reunion in some ways, but many of you I don't know. So I thought it'd be helpful just to do a very quick flyover. So first of all, just a little bit about me personally. I love to travel. My wife and I just really enjoy traveling. In fact, we took this picture in Glacier National Park this last fall on the Road to the Sun. So if you've never been to Glacier, highly recommend it. I am blessed beyond measure to be married to this chick right there in that picture. And I just got to pause for a second and just say, has it not been fun to be a Tennessee ball fan in the last year? I mean, you could pick your favorite sport, and you've had a lot to cheer about in this last year. We are blessed to have 4 adult children, 3 of whom are married. So we're blessed to have 2 amazing son-in-laws and a daughter-in-law that we adore. And our oldest child is not quite yet married. He's super picky, but he's dating someone that we really like. So we're hopeful something might happen there. We also love our friends. We are blessed to have some great friends. So we love going to parties with friends, dancing with friends, dinner with friends, traveling with friends, and are just super blessed to have some great friends. We're very involved in our church. We attend Two Rivers Church, way out west from here. We've been there for almost 15 years now, and it's been awesome for us. And probably our most recent joy has been these little babies. We are blessed to have 7 grandchildren, all under 7. And it is, whoever said like being a grandparent is the best thing ever, they knew what they were talking about. So that's a little bit about me personally. Business background, I want to start by telling a quick story. Even though I'm going to share more details about our second family business, I thought I'd start with a quick story about the first family business. I don't really remember it because I was very, very tiny, but my mom and dad started a family business making recreational vehicles back in the late 60s, early 70s. And there was evidently a recession in the early 70s that put them out of business. And my dad had a really good relationship with his local banker. And he went into his office and said, Jerry, I'm going to take your advice, because the banker had been trying to talk him into filing bankruptcy 2 years earlier. But he kept struggling, kept fighting. And finally he said, I'm going to take your advice and throw in the towel. But I have 2 favors I'd like to ask you in the bank. All right, what's that? I'd first of all like to come and work for the bank, be hired by the bank, to liquidate my own business, because I know the equipment I have, I know the inventory I have, and I know I can get more out of it than if you send a banker or a lawyer or even a liquidator in to liquidate my business. And all I need is $75 a week to feed my family. The second thing I'd like to ask is that if I can pay the bank off and settle all my debts, then I'd like to keep what's left over. The banker said, Adrian, I've been in banking for a lot of years. Nobody has ever asked me that question. I don't even know if it's legal. Let me check, I'll get back with you. And he got back with him and said, you're hired. You now work in the banking industry. And he liquidated his business, ended up with $16,000 left over in inventory, and that's what he used to start the second family business in Michigan. That's where I grew up, a very small town in Michigan. And he started that business along with my mom in 1976. My mom was the bookkeeper. She took 1 accounting class in high school, and that was it. And she became the bookkeeper. And that's before you could just Google, what's the difference between a debit and a credit? So she had a lot of work to do to figure out how to learn to keep the books. But they worked together. We hired other family members. I used to like to think I worked in the early family business when I was about 10 years old, but I think I probably got in the way more than I helped. And obviously you can tell child labor laws, they don't protect kids of entrepreneurs. So I'm just saying. And so the business that he started was actually liquidating inventory, liquidating other businesses. He had so much fun liquidating his own business, he thought, hey, maybe we can make a business out of this. And then in 1982, we moved the business to Knoxville, Tennessee. And I just want to pause for a moment. I love Knoxville. We are blessed. We live in an amazing part of the country. And we moved here when I was starting my junior year in high school. And I told my parents after 2 weeks of being here, if you ever move back to Michigan, I just want you to know I'm okay with that as long as you realize I'm staying here. I fell in love with Knoxville and still love our town. It's amazing. So I joined the company full-time in 1986. I show up on day one and my dad hands me a toilet brush and says, if you're going to get to know this business, this is where you're going to start. And so I did. I started in janitorial services and fairly quickly moved up into shipping and receiving, worked in manufacturing, customer service, sales, marketing, information technology, actually learned how to program the IBM AS400, which is, I think, a dinosaur these days. So I got to touch and taste and learn every part of our business. And by this point, we had transitioned away from liquidation, and we were distributors and manufacturers of mobile hydraulic components in the mobile hydraulic industry. And so that's what we were doing full time. And then my dad likes to tell this story. Early on, for maybe the first couple of years, I would do a project. I'd come back into my dad's office and say, all right, Dad, I finished what you asked me to do. What do you want me to do next? And one day I walked in and he said, you've been here long enough to know what needs to be done. And if I've got to tell you what needs to be done, then I'm not sure this is the right place for you. Then he likes to joke that if I ever wanted to see Kevin again, I had to go into his office to see him. And so we had a great working relationship. We continued to grow. I continued to elevate in terms of responsibility within the business. And we just grew and grew and grew. We ended up buying a manufacturing facility in Singapore. We built a factory from the ground up in India, in Chennai, India. We had at the peak over there about 330 employees. I was young, jet-setting around the world, thinking that everything I touched seemed to turn to gold. And so I started thinking, Kevin, you got it going on. You're really good at what you do. And obviously you know where this is going. I took a face plant smack dab in the middle of a very common proverb. And this began my journey of learning how to eat humble pie. And it began what I like to call our 7 years of famine, where we had 10 very significant things negatively affect our business in very challenging ways. Now, not all of these things were necessarily negative. Like, for example, Brad talked about the Lean Transformation Project that they were a part of in 2008. That wasn't a bad thing in the end, but in the beginning, it was awful. It was very expensive, very disruptive, basically turned our business upside down. It was challenging. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but these were tough years, very tough years. I never want to repeat these years, but I'm so glad I went through these years because of what I learned in these years shaped so much of my leadership, my business skills, all of those things were shaped more in these 7 years than at any other time in my career. I learned a lot through these years. Hope I never have to repeat them, but probably will at some point. Then, by God's grace, we entered into what I like to call the 7 years of harvest, where we had 7 really good years. And a lot of great things happened. I didn't list all of those things. I just touched on some of the highlights. But in 2012, we sold most of our company to a private equity group. I stayed on as the CEO for about 3.5 years and continued to be an owner in Bailey, and had a great relationship with our private equity group out of Chicago. In fact, still in relationship with those guys today. Great group of guys. And then in 2015, I recommended to the private equity group that we upgrade the CEO and promote our COO to take my place. And so they agreed, and we promoted Ken Baker, who's here. Ken, raise your hand. Yeah. To become CEO of Bailey, and he has knocked it out of the park. He's taken Bailey to places I never would have been able to. They have grown dramatically, and he has done a phenomenal job with the business. And then led the second sale of Bailey in 2019, sold to one of the top 50 largest privately held family private equity groups in America called EBSCO, based out of Birmingham, Alabama. Yep. And so we completely sold out. The family did at that point, although we still have a few family members that work for Ken at Bailey. And so a really good, fun run with Bailey. So then we started our third family business. In 2014, my dad had a neighbor that said, Adrian, I know you like property. I think you should take a look at this old lodge that sits on 122 acres. I think you might be interested in it. So he told my mom that he was going to go look at this lodge. And she said, honey, there are two businesses I've told you I never want to be a part of. One is a restaurant and the other one is a hotel. If you want to get in that business, it's either going to be with another wife or another life. I don't know if he was waving at a friend at the auction or what happened, but he ended up buying this business. And so he ran it for a couple of years with another partner, and it was tough. It's a tough business. It's a tough property. It's old, historic, which comes with a whole lot of legacy problems. And so after a couple of years in, it was hemorrhaging with cash. From cash, it was highly dysfunctional, lots of challenges operationally. And so my parents asked my wife and I if we would be willing to buy their partners out and come in and try to rescue the business. And so went to my wife and said, hey, are you interested? She said, I would love to do it. And I said, well, let's be really sober-minded about this. This could either be the best decision we've ever made, or it could be the worst decision we've ever made. Not everybody can work together. Chances are it's going to be the worst decision we ever make. Are you still good? Yeah, let's do it. So we welcomed Connie, my wife, into the family business. And then we invited Kim in the pink shirt, who is Connie's cousin, to become our general manager. So there are now 5 owners owning this historic lodge in North Carolina, about an hour and a half from here. None of us had any experience in hospitality. Not a single one of us ever worked even as a busboy or a server or anything in a restaurant at any time in our life. And so we had, obviously, a whole lot to learn and experienced in this business seasons of famine and seasons of harvest. We jumped right into the school of hard knocks. We didn't know the business. We had a whole lot to learn. And I used to just chuckle at the people, our staff, who would come up to me and say, hey, Kevin, we got this situation. What should we do? That's a really good question. What would you normally do in that situation? Sounds good to me. Go for it. So the School of Hard Knocks, the benefit of that is experiential learning. I got to learn things about a business, an industry, a piece of property that I didn't know anything about before. And there's something really cool about learning something new that I loved. The downside is, at this point, we had kind of tried to step into a semi-retirement sort of state of life. We started having grandbabies at this point, and now we end up moving to North Carolina, and we're living in a studio apartment above a dining room for 2 years. that wasn't necessarily great. It was hard to be away from home. It was hard to live in such a small space, living with my wife and working with my wife, basically 24/7. But the cool thing is relationships. My wife and I learned that, hey, we actually work really well together. Yeah, there are hard moments, but we really complement each other well and had a blast working with each other. We also had some great relationship with other staff that we developed, and even with guests that we were able to interact with and develop relationships with. And that was awesome. My wife ended up tearing her rotator cuff working in the dish pit. I still think she did it on purpose. She saw that as her ticket out of the dish pit. And it worked. She never had to work in the dish pit again. But we had to work our tails off. I mean, we worked every part of that business. I picked up a toilet brush again. I thought I was done with that in Bailey, but no. In hospitality, I ended up having to work in janitorial services again, in housekeeping, in the restaurant, bussing tables, serving, working in the dish pit. We worked every part of that business so that we could learn it, understand it, get to meet our staff, and try to figure out how do we turn this thing around. And it was fun to be part of rescuing a dream. Alcoa Aluminum built this lodge in 1930, and it was a special place nestled into the Smoky Mountains near these dams that Alcoa Aluminum had built. And it was super cool. Andrew Mellon this used to be his favorite place to go and hang out. And then over many, many decades, it fell into disrepair. 2 private families before us bought it, did a whole lot of work to try to rescue the dream, and they did a lot physically, but what we were able to focus on is operationally turning this thing around and being part of rescuing a dream, where people from all over the world could come, do the Dragon. We're very close to the Dragon's Tail, Highway 129, 311 curves and 18 miles. So it's famous for people who like to drive fast. And thankfully, I happen to be one of those guys. And so people love doing the Dragon, and they want a great place to stay or have lunch or dinner afterwards. And so we got to be part of rescuing a dream, which was really cool. And then we received some awful news that our cousin Kim, our general manager, passed away suddenly in her sleep last January, in January 2022. And so I moved back to North Carolina, back into the studio apartment, and lived there for about 5 months as I stepped in to be the general manager to try to figure out what we were going to do next. We were in the process of selling to Poco at the time. In fact, had just gotten an offer the day before. And so it was tragic news for us. And the buyer was very interested in the general manager staying on. And so it was a challenge. But we made it through. And they say when you buy a boat, it's your second best day ever. And when you sell the boat, it's the best day ever. I think hospitality is very similar to that. Anyone in the hospitality business in here? A couple of you guys. Yeah, a few of you. We should have a prayer meeting afterwards because it's hard. It's a tough business. And you put a restaurant and a hotel together, it's 24/7. You've got guests on property, staff on property. It's a hard business. And so I feel for you guys. I loved it. It was awesome. Just like the days being on a boat. But it's also really nice when you have an opportunity to be able to sell a business. And we did that in last October. We sold to Poco Lodge. I'll talk a little bit more about that process later on. So that's a little bit of our story. And I was asked to just share with you some of what we learned along the way. And so we're going to talk about the bottom line, how important that is. We're going to talk about top of mind and how that's even more important. We're going to talk about how valuable people are and they deserve our best. And we're going to also talk about progress and what that looks like in business based on my experience. And then we're going to talk about prayer. And again, these are my experiences in business. Business can be complicated. Every business, every industry is different. So these things may not work. Some of these may not work in your business. You may find one or two of these points helpful. This is just my story. Here are the things that I've learned that at the heart of business, here's what makes it work for me. And here's where I have found success in business, is focusing on these key places. So the first one we're going to talk about is profit. It is foundational. It matters. You can't survive for long without profit. You can't bless your team without a profit with additional pay and benefits. You can't improve the guest experience if you're not profitable. So in my opinion, profit it's a mandatory requirement. We've got to figure out how to be profitable. But if you want my best advice on how to make more money long term, don't focus on it. I have learned the hard way, but I've learned that the less I focus on the bottom line, the more bottom line we end up having. And I'll talk more about what we should be focused on. But be really careful when you focus on just the bottom line, because what I find is we make too many short-term decisions that cost us money in the long run. I remember one story at Bailey. It's probably the most expensive story I remember, but we had a customer. We manufactured some product and we shipped it to them, and it didn't work the way it was supposed to work. It was an application issue. It wasn't a defect in the product, but it was an application issue. Our warranty clearly states we're not responsible for application issues. I know that if they would have taken us to court, we would have won. I know that world well enough to know we would not have lost. They were spitting mad, demanding that we make it right. And they also wanted to make it clear, on the front end, we will never do business with you again, because it really hurt their customer. And so they were really upset with us. It was about a $40,000 mistake, if I remember, or not a mistake, but a $40,000 fix. That was a lot of money to us. That's a lot of money today. It was a lot of money back then. And we spent it. We made it right. We made a long-term decision that negatively impacted the bottom line. But here's the cool thing. At least up until the point I left Bailey, that customer was still buying from us. They did not stop buying from us. They continued to be a customer. We made so much more money in the long run by doing the right thing. And that's the danger. If you focus on the bottom line, we tend to make short-term decisions that do improve the bottom line for that moment, but it costs us in the long run. So again, I can't say enough about that. The other thing, and this has just been something that we have found very helpful, and that is to share in the success. Share in the profits with others. And so this may not work for you, but this is just what we did. It really helped us. We took the first 10% of profits and we gave it to the community. Lots of different ways we did that. We would sponsor staff members on a mission trip, or we would give to certain charities. We actually had a team of people within Bailey that would help decide where are we going to spend this money. That's what we did with the first 10% of profits. Then, with what was left, the first 10% went to, in the form of bonuses, to all staff that are not in leadership. And then the other 15% went to our leadership team. You've got to make sure you take care of your leaders. Everything rises and falls with leadership. So you've got to invest in your leadership team. So we would share 15% of profits with our leadership team. And if you do the math on the way that this works, it leaves 62.5% left for the shareholders. We shared in the success, and it, I think, paid huge dividends because we created owners. Without actually being an owner of the business, we created that sense of ownership. And people were all in. We had very low turnover in Bailey, and we had very low turnover in Topoco as well. And then the other thing we did, I really regret we didn't do this the first time that we sold Bailey. Learned this the hard way. But when we sold Topoco, we implemented a selling bonus. It was so fun. We announced that we were going to sell Topoco to our staff before we listed it back in August of 21. We had a company-wide meeting. Again, because we're 24/7, we had to actually shut down operations for a night to be able to even have a company-wide meeting. And everybody came, and we announced that we were listing Topoco and we're gonna be in the process of selling it. And then we paused for a moment, gave everyone a chance to ask questions and make comments. And of course, first question is always, am I gonna lose my job? We heard a lot of, we don't want you to leave. We enjoy working for you, that kind of stuff. And so then everybody vented, got everything out, and then we announced a sale bonus. We're gonna have a selling bonus, and every single one of you benefits when we sell. Even if we hire somebody the day before we sell, they will benefit. We structured it in such a way that it's fair and equitable in terms of how long people have been there, how many hours they work, all that stuff. And we shared examples of what they would get. It was amazing how the mood of the room changed. It's like, Kevin and Connie, who? And like, can we sell it tomorrow? Like, how long is this gonna take? It changed the entire approach. And so our turnover was already low. It went to almost zero. Nobody wanted to leave. And it was so fun being able to sell this business, which we did in October of last year, and hear the stories. All kinds of really cool stories of this one lady, they remodeled their whole kitchen. Another couple went on an Alaskan cruise. Another couple bought a truck. Just all kinds of really cool things that most of these people would not have had an opportunity to do otherwise. So again, when we can share in that bottom line, we create a sense of ownership. And here's what was really cool. I was really worried for the new buyer. I thought, what's gonna happen when we send that money out? Are they gonna quit? And is the new buyer gonna be in a tough spot? And so we did a couple things to try to help in that. I was shocked. 2.5 months in, not a single person quit. So it created a long-term sense of ownership, which I thought was really cool. All right, next, purpose. This is what's, I think, important to be at top of mind for every business owner, leader, manager, and that is, what is your primary motivator for doing what it is that you're doing? What is that primary motivator? Again, like I said earlier, hopefully it's not the bottom line. I'm not saying that's not important. It's hugely important. We didn't focus on it, but when we sold Bailey, we had to go through all these industry studies, and when we sold Topoco, we did the same thing. I was kind of shocked how much more profitable we were than industry averages, and we never focused on it. I'm not saying we didn't look at it. I didn't say we didn't understand it, but we just didn't focus on it. In Bailey, our core purpose was making positive impacts in the lives of people. I didn't even personally love hydraulics. That was not my passion, but I loved people. And so our purpose that we tried to drive into everything that we did is, how do we make a positive impact in the life of each person we interact with? And so the story I shared about making it right with that one customer, that's an example. We made a positive impact in the life of that person in the decisions that we made. At Topoco, you'll see it's not a big stretch in terms of difference and purpose. Our purpose at Topoco was to create heart-engaging experiences of adventure and sanctuary that wow each and every guest. Because we're located in the middle of the mountains, the tail of the dragon, like we're in the middle of adventure. And what we discovered is people love adventure, and they love to end it in moments of sanctuary. Whether that's sitting by a fire pit talking about their dragon experience, or if it's having dinner next to this amazing river and just talking about how much fun they had on their hike that day. People love that. And we actually created a word. I love making up words. I think it's probably because my English is so bad. But we created a word called adventuary. And that was our core purpose, creating adventuary in the lives of people. And so that's what drove us. That's what we focused on. That was what was top of mind, and that makes a huge difference. It's great to rally your team around that core purpose. It's hard to rally a team around making more money for me. That's just hard for people to get excited about. But when you can rally the team around a core purpose that people can get excited about, it's a game changer. You make raving fans in the marketplace. They sense and experience your core purpose. And even with vendors, it's amazing how many of us, I used to think of vendors as necessary evils. You know, hey, we're gonna beat up on this guy and, you know, drive down the price and all these things. When really, they're partners, because without whatever it is you need from them, you're kind of stuck in the mud. And so even looking at how do we make positive impacts in the lives of our vendors? How do we create great experiences for our vendors so that they want to be in partnership with us, can make a huge difference in the way that you approach the vendor marketplace. All right, and so next is progress. Now, I use the word progress just because it starts with a P, but it's probably the most common buzzword that you'll hear with this is continuous improvement. And for me, actually, I'm going to start with a story first here. My son, my youngest son, we sent him to a leadership camp a number of years ago. He likes to call it Bad Kid Camp, but it truly was a leadership camp. But we did hope it would make a difference in his world as well in that season of his life. And he came back and he said, "Dad, I've been learning something, and that is that we celebrate progress and not perfection." Now, I think it was his way of saying my expectations for him were probably out of line, and I think he was right. So I had some growing up to do as a dad. But I love this principle as it relates to business as well, and that is how do we celebrate progress, making improvement step by step. And so I think continuous improvement or progress, it's a mindset. It's a mindset. You've got to really be all in on this desire to improve, because it will transform your entire business. But you also have to have intentional systems and champions to back that up. Otherwise, it's hard to do much with a mindset alone, but if you can put intentional systems in place, it can make a huge difference. At Topoco, we had a night audit process. Our night auditor would come in at 10:30 at night and leave at 6:30 in the morning, and it took them most of the night to work through the night audit process. So we decided we got to change this. It's a disaster. Nobody can even use the information that's being produced from the night audit process anyway. So we started working on it, and it didn't happen overnight. We had to keep making improvement events on this process. But over time, at the point I left Topoco, our night auditor had been able to do it in about an hour and a half most every night. And the information that was produced out of it was useful. It was helpful. Every morning, I would wake up to a KPI email that would give me all the stats from the previous day. It was all automated, but it didn't happen overnight. And so here's a principle that I love, and it's that 80% is perfect in my book. Now, I'm not talking about quality. I don't want to get on an airplane where somebody said 80% is good enough with me. But as it relates to improvement, don't wait until you think you've got it all figured out. Don't try to improve from where you are to perfection. Hey, if you can make some incremental improvement, that's awesome. We can always revisit, come back, make more improvement. But if you have an idea and you think it's 80% baked, go for it, in my opinion. You've got what you need to get started. Brutal honesty will be your best friend. It's not easy. It's not easy. I remember when we were going through our lean transformation, and we were in a meeting, we were early on in the process, and we were asked by our consultant group, you met Brad Green earlier. This was not Brad saying this, just I don't want you to think ill of him. This was not Brad saying this, but we had the consultant, and he was asking us, as a leadership team, how would you rank yourself on this service metric? I don't remember what the metric was. How would you rank yourself? So he goes around and we all tell him how awesome we are. And it was like 95% service level. Then he pulled out the data that the customers provided on this service metric. And it was like 40%. It was awful. And he said, so you guys think you're here, and this is where you really are. I've got some news for you. You suck. You suck. You're not good at what you do. Now, I think the only reason we continued to use this consulting group is because we already signed the contract. That moment I'll never forget, because I realized that it's really easy for us to lie to ourselves. There's a Bible verse that says, "Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought." And I think it's in there because it's a tendency that we seem to have for some reason, where we think we're really better than we are. And so brutal honesty, it's awful. I hate hearing it, but it can be your best friend. One other quick story, a Bailey story again, is we had a year, and we published our budget, top line, bottom line, other details to our entire staff. And so we were falling short of top line and bottom line. And so we were not going to be able to give the raises, that the cost of living adjustment that we had published. And so we decided that, hey, we got to communicate that. And the way we did our company-wide meetings back then is smaller groups, so that people felt more comfortable to ask questions and interact and that kind of thing. So first meeting comes in, and I start by saying, I've got some great news to share with you this morning. So as you know, sales are down, bottom line's down, but the great news is that we're going to still be able to give a raise. Now, it's half of what we published, but we're still going to be able to give a raise, and so that's great news. And I could tell, kind of like the look on your faces, it just wasn't being received very well. But I pressed on, and we went through, finished the meeting, and went to my buddy Nick, and I said, "Hey, Nick, you got a minute?" "Yeah, sure." "Hey, how'd you think the meeting went?" "Can I be honest with you?" "Yeah, of course, always." "I felt like you were lying to us." "Like, lying to you? What do you mean, lying to you? You said you had great news." "That was not great news. It's half of what we thought we were going to be getting. That's bad news. That's not great news." "Oh man, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate you being honest with me." Second meeting, guys, I got some bad news to share with you this morning. And I went right into the same story. But we are going to be able to give a raise. It's half of what we published, but a round of applause at the end of that meeting. Every meeting after that went very similar. Just a change in my approach of communication. I would have never known that had I not created the relationship with Nick for him to be honest with me. It's hard, but inviting brutal honesty can be your best friend in business. All right, lastly, and this is just something, we had a system for strategy and the way that we would decide what are we going to go after this next year. And so this is just something simple that you can use in your business as well, and that is doing a survey with every single team member. We would send it out, I don't remember the platform, but call it Google Forms, and we would ask other questions, but we always made sure these 4 questions were in there. What's the one thing you think we could do to improve the guest experience? What's the one thing you think we could do to grow our business? What's the one thing you think we could do to make your job more efficient? And what's the one thing you think we could do to make Bailey or Topoco a better place to work? And then we would compile all of that information. We would go through a process to sort of rank it and how often people mentioned it. We went through an assessment to try to at least have all the data available for our leadership team. And then we would go on an offsite thing. And when I say our leadership team, I'm not talking about the top 3 or 4. I'm talking about a group of 20 people, leaders within the business. And we would go through a process to decide together, what are we going to go after? And every single team member had input in what we were going to go after. It was a great process. And I know you guys still have a structured system today. I wouldn't be surprised if those questions are still part of that process that they go through. All right, next, people. You know, it's amazing how often I've said this and how often I hear it. And that is, you know, if it weren't for customers, business would be a lot easier. And if it weren't for employees, business would be a whole lot more fun. Well, that may be true, but at the end of the day, we need employees and we need customers. You can't survive long without either one. And so here is a principle that I've learned that has changed my style of leadership, changed my decision making more than anything else I've ever learned in my life. And it's this principle right here. It's asking myself this question whenever I'm meeting with someone, whenever I'm making a decision: how can I fight for the highest possible good in the life of Ed today when I meet with him? Even if he doesn't deserve it for some reason, how can I fight for his highest possible good? If I have a leader that comes in and says, hey, Kevin, I'm struggling with our team member over here, and I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle it, it's one of the first things I'll ask. All right, what would it look like to fight for their highest possible good? Now keep in mind, you've got to balance this with how do I also fight for the highest possible good in the life of our team? And sometimes I've learned the hard way that can conflict. I've kept a team member on staff much longer than I should have because of the damage that person was doing to the rest of the team. So you got to balance that. Sometimes you got to ask that question: how can I fight for the highest possible good in the life of our team? But this has been a game changer for me in terms of how I lead, and it's actually affected my marriage, my personal life, my friends, my kids. How can I fight for the highest possible good in the life of my son today? It's amazing if you, and especially if you can ask the Lord that question, it's amazing what he'll put on your heart and share with you. Next, recruit values over talent. Oh my God, I have hired so many rock stars that I had to fire sometime later. Values trump skills every day of the week. So be really careful. It's an easy trap to fall into. I've made that mistake countless times. But work really hard to recruit values over talent. Roll your sleeves up. Be willing to work alongside your team. I know you've got a lot of responsibilities, even if it's once every 6 months. It's amazing what it will do to your staff. If you show up one day and work clothes and you say, hey, I need you to teach me what you do. I want to help work with you today. I know you've been talking about some challenges. I think I'll know more of what you're experiencing if I get the chance to work with you today. It's amazing what it'll do to your culture. And then I never apologize for asking people to work hard. I used to tell our staff all the time, I want this to be the best place you've ever worked, and I want this to be the hardest place you've ever worked. Because we cannot create great customer experiences if we're not all working hard. And so I never apologize for asking people to work hard. But we also worked really hard to make it the best place. We wanted people that couldn't wait to come to work. And then we also wanted to create the kind of environment, I can't wait to leave work because I am wore out. And I love my family, and I can't wait to get home and be with them as well. All right, enough about people. Lastly, about prayer. So I have a confession to make here. When Cindy asked me to write up just a short paragraph of what I'm going to talk about, prayer wasn't included in it. And so I had come up with the people and profit and progress and purpose and sent that to her. And I prepared the bullet points of what I wanted to share. And then I'm about done with it, and I then decide to pray and say, Lord, thank you so much just for these stories and what you've allowed me to learn. Lord, do you want me to put a point in here about you, or do you want me just to weave that story in through the rest of the points? And what I heard in my spirit was, a point would be good. Like, okay. Well, Lord, what should I call it? And what I heard was, well, since you went with P words, let's go with prayer. I'm like, okay, let's do it. And so this was not in the paragraph. And the more I started processing and thinking through this, the more I discovered that it's at the center of everything I've learned about business. It's been at the center of some of these success stories that I was able to share. I absolutely believe that it was God's grace that enabled us to make it through. We came super close to losing everything in 2009. We ended up caught up in this goofy thing in India. with this communist union. It was scary. And we came very close to losing absolutely everything. And all I can say is that I don't even know, when I look back, I don't even know how we got out from underneath that, the way that it happened. It's, you've heard people say it's a God thing. It truly was a God thing. I give him 100% credit for us being able to survive that. And so what I've discovered is that for me, being in business, my relationship with Jesus is at the center of everything that I do, and it affects everything. I have this sort of philosophy that as a child of the King, we're invited to be part of the family business in capital letters. And so as I work in the family business in lowercase letters, it's the big, it's the capital letter family business working inside the lowercase family business. And therefore, it affects everything. It affects the way I interact with people. It affects the decisions that we make. It affects my thought life, like what I'm thinking about when nobody else is around. It affects every single thing that we do. And what I've discovered is that interacting with the Lord, it's two-way. Like I mentioned earlier, it's amazing. If we just ask and then wait for the answer, I was so much of my business life was writing a list of what I wanted and then putting it into the prayer vending machine and then just hoping something would happen. What I've discovered is that when we ask the Lord, he's so faithful. And there's so many things that there's so many stories. I could spend the rest of your day telling you stories about where I was at a loss of what to do. And I asked, and all of a sudden this thought or it just welled up, like, I know what we're supposed to do. And I know that was a gift from the Lord. And then lastly, my last point is that it's just a process of learning to mine for gold in the middle of the mud. I can't remember what they call these shows, but they're on Discovery Channel where people are prospecting for gold. And it's just amazing. They'll go to the middle of nowhere, dragging this old beat up equipment, and they're dredging up this awful looking mud. All that work looking for just tiny little nuggets and flakes of gold. And what I've learned, I talked about the 7 years of famine, and really, as business owners, if we're really honest with ourselves, most days have moments of famine and moments of harvest in them. There are bad things that seem to happen every day. Bad news. We lost a customer, we got a price increase, all kinds of things. And what I've learned in that is that with every bit of bad news, there's opportunities. There's wisdom. There's opportunities to improve, to grow, to learn, to go deeper in relationships. There's opportunities in those difficult moments. And so I've just learned over time that I get less upset about bad news. I still have my moments, but I get less upset about it, and I get more motivated to try to discover, all right, what good does the Lord have in this for us? Because I know there's something we can learn, whether it's for me personally as a leader or for us as a business. There's some kind of gold we could mine out of this. And so I think it's a mindset that can be a game changer in the way that, at least for me, in the way that I approach challenges that will happen in business. All right, so that's my story. Those are the things that I've learned along the way, many other things, but those are some of the highlights. And so I'm happy to ask any questions. Are we okay on time, Cindy? Yes. Okay, I'm happy to ask any questions that you have. Yes, sir. Good to see you again.
What's on your agenda now? What's next?
Great question. I'm exploring a couple of opportunities right now that I have way too much energy to hang out on the golf course. Besides, I'm a terrible golfer. But so I have a couple things I'm exploring, but I have not made any decisions yet. So I shouldn't say that. I helped my son and his business partner start a business, so I'm helping coach them. that's a blast, but it doesn't require a ton of time. So there's a few things like that that I'm dabbling in, but the next big thing I haven't decided yet. But thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
How often did your leadership team meet to review the course of the business and ideas?
Yeah, so we had a tempo, a process where that we set up and how often we would meet. And as a senior leadership team, we would meet once a week. But it wasn't to explore ideas so much as it was to tackle roadblocks and problems and challenges with getting those ideas implemented. What I've learned about me, I'm an idea guy, and what I learned about me is I was exhausting my team, because every week I'd come in with the new idea, and I'd frustrate the team because they're like, well, what happened to last week's idea? I'm still in the middle of trying to get that thing done. And I just realized it was not healthy for us as a company or a team. And so that's where I had to create a private whiteboard for me to splatter my ideas on. But I had to, unless it was, like sometimes, life happens, and if it was an idea, we've got to at least talk about it. That's one thing. But most ideas, I would say, hey, we got to wait till November when we go through our planning process for the next year, and then I'll bring it up. So most of our meetings were just tackling, obstacles together and sharing information. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned culture a couple times.
Yes.
What did you do to establish culture and then to maintain it?
Great question. So culture is hard. It is a hard thing to even define. We defined it with values. We would just identify what are those core values that we're going to be about. And that was the primary thing we would use to define this is what our culture is, and this is what we're going to recruit to. And then we would never stop talking about them, and we would do training events. Anytime we'd have a company meeting, we'd try to give an attaboy to an employee who demonstrated that value in the last week, that we could just sort of highlight and brag on that person, just to never let up on those values. But here's just something I'll say: don't ever give up on culture. I've read a couple books, and they seem to be consistent in this. If you want to change your culture from where it is today to where you want it to be, it's a 3-year process. It's exhausting, but don't ever give up, because it is one of those things. It's hard to measure, but it takes a lot of time to get it in motion and get it established. Yes, sir.
Define culture as to how you have it internalized in your own brain.
So I would define culture as the personality of the business. Each individual has a personality, and there are traits about me that might be very different than traits that you have. And so in business, it's really trying to define, what do we want the personality of the business to be? For example, like with Topoco, one of our values was to smile and be friendly. Like, we're in the hospitality business, right? You got to smile and you got to be friendly. And so that's a personality trait, though, because I know some great people. I've got a good buddy that, for whatever reason, he just hardly ever smiles. He's a happy guy, but he just doesn't smile. I just don't want him working in my hospitality business, because people, they expect smiles in that business. And so it's really defining the personality attributes that you want in your business that will help you achieve the top of mind purpose that you have.
Can you talk about team building?
Yeah. So the thing I love, again, about values is you can always incorporate those in whatever team building exercise you go through. And the thing is, I shared kind of the one thing that's changed me in terms of a leadership thing, but there's so many good things out there. And so with team building, I just think it's worth the investment to keep training your leaders and keep training your staff on all kinds of things. My good friend Brad Brinson retired from being a pastor a few years ago and has an amazing gift of being able to speak. He's a much better speaker than I am. But he has a passion for leadership. And so he's developed this, he didn't develop the tool, but he discovered a tool that he became an expert in. And it's really defining the way people think. There are different thinking styles. And so he's done a great job of putting this data together and teaching teams like on how do you recognize my thinking style versus Ken's thinking style. It's different. We know that about each other. His is very beneficial to do certain things. Mine is very beneficial to do certain things, but they're different from each other. And so rather than seeing Ken as being different in a bad way, I now see Ken different in a good way because he brings things to the table that I can't bring to the table. So I just encourage investing in your team. To me, they're dollars well spent on leadership. And we would train everybody about just the concept of leadership skills. We would train everybody in the business about leadership because I think it matters. All right, maybe one or two more questions. Yes?
Okay. As energetic as you are, et cetera, you probably, in all likelihood, don't even cradle retirement, do you?
I don't. I have struggled to find the biblical case for retirement in the way that we Americans like to think of it. I think that, like, when I've observed people who have retired, what I've noticed, those that retire to the sofa, I don't know, I've just seen their quality of life drop quickly. And when I've seen people retire to another passion or a purpose, whether it's volunteer work or, even being on the golf course, because that's their ministry. I've got a guy who loves playing golf, but he loves inviting new guys to play golf all the time, and that's where he does ministry. I love that. So I think retiring to another purpose, I think is a phenomenal thing to do. And so that's what I'm looking for, is what's that next purpose.
That's what I envision by what you just said. You're just changing your activity.
Yes. And here's the other interesting thing, and I love the fact that we were able to go from Bailey Hydraulics, mobile hydraulic manufacturing distribution, to hospitality, completely different industry. And I had a theory inside, and I thought, it'll be really interesting, because I know nothing about this industry at all, and we may fall flat on our face, but I'm just curious. What principles, like what business principles can I take from my experience over here, apply over here, and will it make a difference? And all these points I shared, we applied in TOPOCO, and it made a difference. We ended up rescuing a dream and creating a very profitable business that people were attracted to. I actually got to meet a lady and her husband back there, who I think her husband, they spoke out of, I don't know, but she stopped me and said, "Hey, I want to tell you, we got to go to TOPOCO in 2020. We had the best experience, and it was so much fun." And so it's just cool. We've heard so many great stories. Now, we've heard, hospitality's hard. It's like my mom said, the reason she didn't want to get into that business is because you can't satisfy everybody's eating habits or bed habits. So we definitely, and we fell short, a lot of times. But overall, we created great experiences for people, and that's just fun. And those experiences were created because of all these principles that we put into place. It took time. Didn't happen overnight, and man, we made a ton of mistakes. I could share stories that make me cry to even think about them, but we made a lot of mistakes, but we learned from those. All right, one last question, and then I got to wrap it up. Cindy's giving me the look. Yes, sir.
What's your Myers-Briggs?
INFP. Yep.
I saw you were certified.
Yeah. Introvert, intuitive, feeler, perceiver. And my wife, ESTJ. Yeah. We are wired completely opposite. And that's a whole nother story. It's awesome. All right, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you.